The Battle of Dien Bien Phu, fought between March and May 1954, marked the decisive end of French colonial rule in Indochina and set the stage for the division of Vietnam. This battle pitted the French Union forces against the Viet Minh, the communist-led nationalist army under General Võ Nguyên Giáp. Despite superior firepower, artillery and fortified positions, the French suffered a catastrophic defeat. The fall of Dien Bien Phu shocked the world, accelerated the end of the First Indochina War, and had far-reaching consequences for Cold War geopolitics. Background: French Indochina and the rise of the Viet Minh. After World War II, France sought to reassert control over its colonies in Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. However, nationalist movements, particularly the Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh, resisted colonial rule. Viet Minh strategy: guerrilla warfare, political mobilization, and support from the rural population allowed the Viet Minh to control much of the countryside. French strategy: the French aimed to hold strategic towns and supply lines, relying on fortified positions and air support to counter the Viet Minh. International context: the Cold War was emerging and the U.S. began providing financial aid to France to fight communist expansion in Southeast Asia. By 1953, France planned to lure the Viet Minh into a decisive set-piece battle at Dien Bien Phu, hoping to destroy Giap's forces with concentrated firepower. French strategy and assumptions. Fortified base: the French established a heavily fortified garrison at Dien Bien Phu, located in northwestern Vietnam near the Laotian border. Air supply dependence: the remote valley required aerial resupply, including artillery, food, and ammunition. Allied support: the French expected American logistical and air support, though direct U.S. involvement in combat was minimal. Underestimation of enemy: French commanders assumed the Viet Minh could not bring heavy artillery into the mountainous terrain, leaving them confident in their superior firepower. The French strategy relied heavily on static defense, assuming that the garrison could withstand any assault long enough for reinforcements or a decisive counterattack. Viet Minh strategy. General Võ Nguyên Giáp developed a meticulous strategy to overcome French advantages. Artillery deployment: Viet Minh forces moved artillery pieces through jungle trails and rugged mountains, often disassembled and camouflaged. Encirclement: Giap aimed to surround the French garrison, cutting off supply lines and isolating Dien Bien Phu from reinforcements. Trench warfare: Viet Minh dug extensive trenches and tunnels to approach French positions under cover, reducing vulnerability to air and artillery strikes. Psychological warfare: constant pressure, night assaults, and propaganda aimed to demoralize French troops and encourage surrender. Giap's strategy reflected patience, logistical ingenuity, and understanding of the terrain, turning the French assumptions against them. The battle: March, May 1954. Initial engagements. The Viet Minh launched preparatory artillery bombardments in March 1954, catching French forces off guard. French paratroopers stationed in strongpoints like Elaine, Beatrice, and Gabrielle faced immediate heavy artillery and infantry assaults. Encirclement and siege. By April, Viet Minh forces completely encircled Dien Bien Phu, cutting off ground access and making the French entirely dependent on air supply. Intense artillery bombardment destroyed airstrips, reducing resupply efficiency and preventing reinforcements. French troops, despite holding strong points, suffered casualties, shortages of ammunition, and declining morale. Final assault. In early May, Viet Minh launched massive, coordinated infantry attacks, supported by artillery. French defenses, weakened by attrition and isolation, were overwhelmed. On May 7, 1954, French commander Colonel Christian de Castries surrendered, ending the battle and effectively ending French colonial control in Vietnam. Reasons for French defeat. Underestimation of Viet Minh capabilities. French command assumed the Viet Minh could not deploy heavy artillery in the mountains. Giap's ingenuity in moving artillery pieces and digging trenches nullified French defensive advantages. Dependence on air supply. Isolation in a remote valley made French forces vulnerable to artillery and anti-aircraft attacks. The destruction of airstrips reduced reinforcement and resupply, leaving troops starving and low on ammunition. Static defense doctrine. The French relied on fortified positions, which became fixed targets for Viet Minh artillery and infantry. Lack of mobility prevented counterattacks or tactical withdrawal. Superior Viet Minh strategy. Coordinated encirclement, night assaults, and trench warfare gradually wore down French forces. Giap demonstrated patience and flexibility, exploiting terrain and local knowledge. Low morale and political instability. French troops were demoralized by prolonged fighting, harsh conditions, and doubts about political support. Political instability in France and limited public support weakened commitment to sustaining a prolonged campaign. Consequences of the battle. End of French Indochina. The Geneva Accords of July 1954 divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, creating North Vietnam (communist) and South Vietnam (anti-communist). French colonial rule ended, marking the collapse of European imperial control in Southeast Asia. Cold War implications. The U.S. became more involved in supporting South Vietnam, fearing communist expansion. Dien Bien Phu influenced American foreign policy in the early stages of the Vietnam War. Psychological and political impact. The defeat shocked Western powers, highlighting the limits of colonial armies against nationalist insurgencies. Ho Chi Minh's leadership and Giap's strategy were celebrated, inspiring anti-colonial movements globally. Lessons from Dien Bien Phu. Terrain and logistics are critical. Control of high ground and supply lines is decisive in modern warfare. Adaptability wins. Viet Minh adapted strategy, logistics, and tactics to overcome technological disadvantages. Over-reliance on technology is risky. French superiority in artillery and air power was neutralized by enemy ingenuity and environmental factors. Political and moral support matters. Troop morale and domestic political will are vital to sustaining campaigns. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu was a turning point in modern military history. France's defeat was not due to a single factor but a combination of strategic miscalculations, logistical vulnerabilities, underestimation of the enemy, and over-reliance on static defenses. The Viet Minh's victory demonstrated the effectiveness of determined, well-coordinated insurgent forces against colonial powers, reshaping Southeast Asia and influencing the geopolitics of the Cold War. Dien Bien Phu remains a case study in modern asymmetric warfare, emphasizing that technological superiority and fortified positions alone do not guarantee victory, and that strategy, adaptability, and local knowledge often determine outcomes.